Since this group is small, I'm afraid somebody's going to be behind a column, so I'll try and move. But I'm going to probably talk less than I normally do and try and do most with questions and driven by your interests. This is a simple idea. It's actually a very simple idea. And it comes from an equally simple belief that education is a key element to every big problem, whether it's eliminating poverty, having world peace, dealing with the environment, that whatever solutions, and there's always an S at the end of the word, you engage, they will have a component of education. In some cases can be done just with education, and in no instance can I think of where there is not an element of education. And if you look at the education landscape, I've spent my entire life in higher education. The real problem seems to be, at least to me, in primary education. In some countries, Nigeria and Pakistan are examples, 50% of the children do not go to primary school. And what I mean is not that they get to third grade and drop out, they do not go to first grade. In Afghanistan, 75% of the girls do not go to first grade. And you get other countries where they do get to first grade, but very, very small numbers. I should know them all in my head, but really by fourth grade, you're back down to sort of 50% of the kids are not in school. And one way to solve that is obviously to build schools and train teachers, just like you build roads and put in electricity. But that's going to take a certain amount of time, and it's not going to happen very quickly. And so one question that we asked ourselves, could we actually leverage the children themselves? Could you do something as simplistic as give every child a laptop, a connected laptop, and really leverage education in other ways? And that was the idea. And it didn't happen 3 years ago when I woke up one morning, or 5 years ago. It's happened over a long period of time at MIT, influenced a great deal by a man named Seymour Papert, who was Piaget's colleague before he came to MIT in the 1960s, worked a lot at the Artificial Intelligence Lab, was the co-director actually, and then with me at the Media Lab. And the Media Lab, for those of you who followed it, always had about 20 to 30%, depending on the year, of its activity on sort of how children learned, and not so much to build multimedia teaching software, but really the other side of that equation, namely how do children acquire knowledge, how do they learn, and sort of learning was always the key phrase. And in fact, I'll just show you a few images only because in 1982, which feels like an awfully long time ago, Seymour and I were involved with a center in France that was funded at first by the OPEC organization and later by the French to bring what was at that time Apple IIs and use them in schools, in this case in Senegal, Pakistan, and Colombia. It was way ahead of its time. They didn't get traction in the sense that those projects continued on beyond the time that we were running them, but it did prove very quickly to us that these kids, this child actually didn't speak French or English, that these kids could just play those like pianos. They were probably using dance software. I don't know. But at any rate, it was really very, very early on, and it didn't, as I said, continue with any traction. But the subsequent years at the Media Lab, there was a lot of work that had to do with connecting kids in remote locations. And then sort of about 20 years later, not quite, but 18 years later, I got involved with building a school. I mean, the school in the background was something that I built personally. It was a long story, and I won't bore you with the details, but there is a side story, and fate always plays a funny role in these things. My son at the time was living in Italy. And he had girlfriend problems, and he had a startup company that wasn't working. And so I said to him, if you don't mind working for your father, why don't you go to Cambodia and connect this school? And he did. And he did such a good job that when I looked at this picture, both literally and sort of visiting the school, I asked myself how, and this was 1998 it started, and the picture was taken probably in 2002. The first English word I'm always fond of telling people of those kids is, you can imagine, it was Google. Okay. And when the kids brought those home at night, since the village has no electricity, certainly no telephone, it really was the brightest illumination in the house. It was the brightest light source in the house. And when I looked at that picture, I asked myself, what in that picture wouldn't happen with normal market forces? And if you look at the telecommunications piece, you can argue that's going to happen. And that regulatory regimes are changing, and there's Wi-Fi and WiMAX and 3G and all of these things that sort of prices will come down, and sort of that, it's not on autopilot, but that's going to happen. The need for power is, people are working on that and so on, but the laptop is the one that I looked at, and I said, just if you let things go the way they're going, it's not going to change. That the DNA of electronics is to just keep adding features because the prices are coming down, and every corporation is going to add features and features just to sort of compensate. And a cell phone is a good example. Next year your cell phone will make toast or something. It'll just because you just keep adding features. And what's happened with laptops, I don't know about your laptop, but mine is very slow. And it's less reliable than it was, and it takes forever to turn on and forever to turn off. And what's happened is that the rate at which you add the features has gone a little bit faster than the rate of which we get faster processors and more memory. And there's sort of a bloat in the system, so that everybody's laptop is like an SUV. I mean, you're using more fuel to move the car than you are to move the passenger, and by an enormous amount. And so the question was, could we break that spell? Could we actually go in and do something that was like a Mini? You could still drive on highways very fast, but very fuel economic, and then do it for $100. And then when we were able to sort of even propose that, we would then ask, can we actually design this from the bottom up for children and around learning? Not try and sort of scale down a laptop as the ones we know them from sort of office applications and make a diminutive laptop for kids, a little bit like 16th century painters painted children as diminutive adults. The question was, could we actually do something from the bottom up? And so that's what we set out to do. We set out to do it about 3 years ago. And we made a very fundamental decision in the beginning, and one I look back at and think of as the best decision we made ever, and that was to make it a nonprofit. And I have to tell you that everybody that gave me advice advised me not to, said make it a profit-making, make a lot of money, and then give the money away. Well, making it a nonprofit had three really important advantages, and still has them. One is the clarity of purpose. I can talk to any politician, head of state, and it's just absolutely clear that it's about learning and education and children. I have no shareholders. I have nobody that has to, benefit other than the kids. And even our supply chain, yes, it helps if you make 10 million instead of 5 million, but the person manufacturing that laptop is the world's largest manufacturer of laptops by a long shot. In fact, the company makes 40% of the world's laptops. It's a company you've probably never heard of called Quanta. And so Quanta gets the prices as if we are making tens of millions of them. And they give us those prices because we're a nonprofit. And so whether we make 1 million or 10 million doesn't matter. It's really very interesting. So, and I couldn't do that. If I was a profit-making organization, Quanta wouldn't do that for me. And they're not losing money, but they're using the scale that they have. And it's very, very important. And so it's just one example of sort of using the clarity of purpose. The second is you attract extraordinary people. You attract people when you post a job with a 0 salary. You get a very interesting kind of person applying. And they're not all 65 years old. Okay? There's some that have done very well in startups, and their kids are saying, you know, mom or dad, you know, change the world. You know, and so we get some extraordinary people. All of our professional services, the communications, the legal, the PR, the search firms, and so on, and they're the best ones. When it comes to search, Spencer Stewart does it for us, okay? Maybe there's another search firm in the room. I'm not meaning to insult anybody, but they're just, you know, the legal firms, Foley Hoag here in Boston represents us. And you just get you really get very, very interesting people, and so that's a second. And then the third is that you can make partnerships. Now, the UN wouldn't normally be a partner, and when we launched this, we launched it with Kofi Annan in Tunis. And when we were it'll be 3 years ago next month. It was the 15th of November, so just less than 3 years ago, and we showed this machine. Now, I sort of smile when I see it, but this was the laptop we showed, and every country in the world was there. Lots of heads of state, all the ministers of education. It was exactly the right place to do it. And Kofi Annan and I announced it and showed it, and it was just wall-to-wall cameras. And Kofi Annan is such a cool cucumber. We were asked to, in front of the TVs, to close the laptop and crank them. And as he was cranking his, the handle fell off in his hand, and he didn't look up. He just continued looking and kept moving his hand like this. The thing was stationary, you know, and almost nobody noticed. And it was that image helped a great deal. Even though it's not the right laptop, everybody remembered the pencil yellow crank. Yeah, this is a laptop. It's for the poorest kids in the world. It's for the most remote locations, and obviously they don't have an AC outlet to plug it in. 50% of the kids in this world do not have electricity at home or at school. So you can't build a laptop that plugs into the wall. Okay? And you hear a lot of people who say they're competing with and they have competitive products. Rubbish. Not one of them is even close when it comes to power. Okay? So well, I'll talk about that again in a second. Oh, actually, there it is. So this is what we did. Just to put this in context, when we decided to make it, your laptop uses 35 to 40 watts, maybe 45, depending if you have a big screen. And we're running at 2. Okay, that's our... And the reason we're running that low isn't because we want to be green, which of course we do want to be, but that wasn't the purpose. The purpose was to run with sufficiently little power that you could power it with your body. And by body, I mean by cranking something or pulling something. If you allow a bicycle, we have one in the office where the bicycle is up in the air, and when you pedal, back wheel is turning a generator, you can generate about 60 or 70 watts. Okay, but when you're doing it with your hand, everybody in this room can generate about 20 watts for 3 or 4 minutes, and they get very tired, but you can generate about 30 watts. 20 watts. Dual mode, that just means that you can read the display in sunlight as well as have it backlit, the network, and sort of rugged. I don't want to spend too much time on features, but we have 5 principles. And again, this is one of the advantages of being a nonprofit. You can actually go to the Minister of Education and say, here are our 5 principles. And if you don't want to follow the 5 principles, tell us right now, and we'll go elsewhere. And that's really very important because, for instance, the first one, which seems to me should be kind of obvious, is that the children have to own the laptops. They have to take them home. They have to be part of their lives. They bring them home. It affects the family. They use it for both music and video and sort of things that have to do with playing as well as learning. It's sort of seamless in their life. And there's some people say, well, no, it's government money and we can't do it. It has to be government property. So, well, okay, fine. And we move on. And so it really is very important to have the flexibility to do that. And low ages. Politicians always say, well, we have to work with the high schools and the older children because they'll be in the workforce sooner and they have to be IT literate. And so I said, that's a different problem. It's a real problem, but it's not the one that we're dealing with. Saturation is also very important. If we were a school right now, everybody has one. And it's not that just 8 people have it here and then 8 more in Newton and another 8 in Worcester, that we saturate areas. And that's, again, politically hard because it means not necessarily doing every state in a country. You might focus on 1 or 2 states to get high saturation. Connectivity goes without saying, and free and open source is also very, very important. So these were the principles. Maybe it's avocation, I happen to think design is important, and so we spent a lot of time. I will actually pass this around while people can. One of the things, I'll show it here, so I guess I don't need to. But you can just play with it. It is connected. I found a Wi-Fi signal, an unlocked Wi-Fi signal. One of the things that we did was to make it into a games machine as well as an electronic book. So this is, again, something that's tilted toward the children. And also, everybody smiles when the little ears come up. I've been in meetings where everybody pulls out their laptop, and I have my silly little green laptop with me, and nobody can get a signal except me. Okay. You've had that experience?
It's good.
Yeah. And the reason is not because we have better radios and we pay more for the radios in there. It's because by having these ears, which aren't necessarily in the plane of the screen, you get really good reception. And, I don't know if any other laptop would be connected in the room now without a password. Everybody said, great idea, but they can't do it. And it was not clear what that meant. They can't do it. It could have meant that it's not possible to do, or it could have meant that these academics couldn't do it. That's the real assembly line. They're pushing 100,000 a month through that line right now. And the millionth laptop will come off in about 40 or 60 days from now. It depends a little bit on what happens over the next, between now and Christmas. And when I say the millionth, it's in 31 countries at the moment. And I'll even have a list later. So it has traction. Now, I always wanted to have more traction, but it does. It's rolling out. When we drop it into remote locations, it's usually a satellite comes with it, a satellite dish, you connect the kids. The economics are not that bad. It's about $300 a month, but if you have 1,000 kids on that network, that's 30 cents per kid per month, which is perfectly reasonable. I won't spend time on these. Let me just talk a little bit about the countries, the rollout, and then sort of one thing I want to get you to do when you leave here, and that's not buy a laptop either. I'm not. Again, because it's a nonprofit, we can do things like localize in languages that would normally not be addressed. And I don't know, Doug, you probably don't qualify because I probably talked to you about this. But if anybody other than Doug and Debbie and Susanna can guess what that keyboard is, I will send you a laptop, a free laptop.
What do you mean by guess?
What language is it? Okay. And just to make you feel really badly, 80 million people speak that language. Okay. And then, sorry?
French.
No. You have to know. Wild guesses don't count. You have to really. And then what's really bad is not really bad, but is also true is that when I tell you what it is, most people won't have heard of the language. It's Amharic, and America is spoken in Ethiopia. It's the language in Ethiopia. There had never been an Ethiopian keyboard. There is no commercial value in having an Ethiopian keyboard. Debbie and I were in Mongolia this summer. There's nothing in Mongolian. Their cell phones are in English. Obviously, Microsoft Windows is in English. So to localize is really very important. And Mongolia, it's been fully translated into Mongolian and America. So what we thought at first is we go to 6 countries and get each of the 6 countries to do 1 million laptops to get the supply chain running. And I spent, in that period of my life, over 300 days a year traveling and spending time in those, particularly in those 6 countries, getting, in each case, the head of state to agree to do 1 million laptops. Now, what does agree mean? Okay, agree means, because I was still running around with that crank machine and sort of models. Agree meant that Musharraf is hugging Nicholas in front of a camera saying, "I'll do 1 million machines." I mean, it's that kind of agreement. It's not a written agreement, but it was enough. It was enough press and enough sort of public sort of presence that the folks in Taiwan, there were 1,000 engineers working on it at the time, paid for by other people. Those engineers, or at least the people paying their salaries, were certain convinced that this was going to happen, that those 6 countries would buy 1 million machines. Well, a little over a year ago, last summer, it became obvious that those 6 countries wouldn't buy 1 million machines, partly because there was pressure from the commercial side, but also, you don't just write a $200 million check to Citicorp. That we needed something else, and so we did 2 things. One is, in the meantime, other countries, and this is hard to, but the reason that Uruguay and Peru are in bold is Uruguay and Peru came to us, and particularly Uruguay. And the president of Uruguay, who has another 12 months in office, wants his legacy to be 2 things. One thing is that 1 laptop per child is every child in Uruguay. And at the moment, as we speak, there are 200,000 kids in Uruguay who have laptops, another 200,000 that have just been ordered for thing, and then you only need 50,000 to complete it because there are 450,000 kids 6 to 12 years old in that country. So that country, by the time Vasquez leaves office, will have every child in the country. So it'll not only be 1 laptop per child, but it's 1 laptop per every child in that country. Peru's a bigger country. It's harder, but Peru will have the most laptops. They will have as many as 1 million or 1.5 million by the end of next year. So that's a huge number. So Peru and Uruguay, the reason they're in bold is because they sort of came to us. The second thing we did, and I'll go back to that slide in a moment, is we did last year a program called Give One, Get One in November, where you could buy a laptop for $399. Did anybody do it in the room? 1, 2. 2 people. 3. Okay. And that generated 185,000 laptops, of which 100,000 were available to give away. Free. So then it's not a $100 laptop, it's a $0 laptop. And so what we did is, in all of those countries have laptops to some degree, but in the case of Haiti, Rwanda, and Mongolia, we actually gave them a substantial number, 10,000 each, to get them started and sent teams to launch them. And it worked particularly well in Rwanda, where it got momentum. It worked least well in Mongolia, partly because they didn't have a government. In fact, their government was basically discontinued in the end of June because the elections were contested and only came back in operation about 3 weeks ago. So what we're doing again this year, November 17th, is doing the Give One, Get One program again. And the idea here is to really go through the roof with it. Now, last year, when we did it, we had all sorts of logistical problems, because we didn't have laptops. So you'd order it, and you'd have to wait 90 days, and then so on and so forth. And this year, Amazon's running it. So people can literally go to Amazon, click, and get their laptop the next day. So it's a really big, and Amazon's doing this pro bono. They've joined as a partner, and so we hope. So the one thing I want you to do is not go buy one at Amazon. You know, you can do that too, but that's not what I really want you to do is tell as many people as possible. Okay, and just tell people about it, because if you tell 30 people and they tell 30 people, I mean you know the scheme. It just needs to spread. And so when I speak to audiences, that's the one thing I ask you is go tell people about it, because the more people know, even in this environment. In fact, you don't have to buy one for $3.99. You can give one for $1.99. So I mean it's not, in this environment it'll be more challenging, but with Amazon I think it'll work better. We've announced the next machine, and the reason we did this is so that people would copy it as fast as possible. We won't have this for a couple of years, so what we're doing is not trying to show a next model as much as show people what we're planning, and it will have lots of features that are really interesting. It'll run at less than 1 watt, for example. And it'll be, the laptop that's circulating is sort of a laptop that can also be an electronic book, and this is really an electronic book that can also be a laptop. It can be used flat or it can be used as a laptop. And what I want to end with, in the sense of getting you to ask questions, is just quickly, some of the countries, I've just put some images here to tell you about the countries. Peru not only is the biggest number, but they have chosen for the first 200,000 laptops to do them in the remote, really remote villages where they don't even speak Spanish, and to do one-room schools and small schools. In some cases, they're 3 days away from Lima, and I think that's just absolutely terrific. I was just down there a couple of weeks ago, and the president of Peru had gotten together the industrialists to have sort of a breakfast meeting with them to get them to match some of the government money and support him. And he got up and gave a 30-minute speech without a single note in front of him. It was being translated to me simultaneously, and it was as if he had studied at MIT. He was talking about children and learning and self-esteem, and I was sitting there, blown away. I mean, this man truly believes in 1 laptop per child, just like President Vasquez in Uruguay. This is in Cambodia. The kids, this is actually the same school as the one I showed you at the very beginning. These kids are pros. Khmer is an interesting language. It did not have a keyboard. In fact, they're now arguing. What often happens when you don't have a keyboard is that constituencies are created, and now there are 2 groups arguing that their keyboard is the right one, and we're kind of caught in the middle. This is in India, and this teacher, whom we met this summer, really had always taught where the kids sat in little perfect lines and was sort of all eyes forward. And this is really the way he teaches now. And one of the things that people ask us, and it's something we're doing a lot of, we want to get it really published on our website at least by this 17th of November, is what are some of the results? It's okay, this has been going on. It's one thing to talk about the features, but what are some of the results? Well, one result that's common through all of these is that the teachers report that discipline problems really drop, that truancy goes away, and that more important perhaps than anything else, the parents get very involved. Now, how do you measure that? Well, there's no parent involvement previously. It's easy to measure. This is Nigeria. In Nigeria, it's normally not this orderly, but it was one of the first countries. And in fact, I don't ordinarily tell the story, but just after the meeting in Tunis, I went to Nigeria with that little laptop that I showed you from the Tunis meeting, and went to see President Obasanjo. I had never met him, and he kindly received me in his villa, it's called, which is their White House. And they had a big meeting room with a long table, and all of his ministers were on one side of the table. His seat was at the end, and then I was all alone. On the other side, I don't travel with an entourage or anything. I was there alone with my little laptop. And he comes into the room in his blue robes flowing, and he's a very impressive man. He always wears robes. He doesn't wear suits. And everybody stands up, and then he sits down. Everybody sits down. And I'd never met him. And he points his finger at me, and he says, "Professor Negroponte, I have one word for your laptop." So it's kind of everybody's sort of cliffhanger, and he sort of says to me, "Enchanting." I melted. I can't tell you. I came back to OLPC, and I told the story to people. It just was exhilarating. People said, enchanting. It was kind of, and it helped rally people and so on. And 8 months later, I went back, and I was in Abuja and went to see him, and I said, I'm only here to thank you, because your one word, enchanting, was very invigorating and got us, was very encouraging and really very helpful. And to express our thanks, we are going to make the laptop your national colors. And the national colors of Nigeria are white and green, obviously. Thank God they weren't brown and maroon. I did check them out before making the offer, but it's exactly that green and exactly that white, and that's where the color comes from. This is in Uruguay. This particular school, I went to visit it in April, and it's a white stucco school with a 2-foot-high green line painted around the school. I don't know, maybe I'm too easily impressed by things like that. But this is Mongolia. It's not a particularly important picture, but Mongolia, 50% of the families, thus kids, are nomadic, which is interesting. This was just from Iraq about a week ago. We have about 1,000 in Iraq, and I think that'll go up to about 10,000 very, very soon. This is Uruguay again. The lucky kids get to go to school on horses. But the reason I have this is that this is the last slide, and I have to tell you, when a country issues a postage stamp, okay, with your laptop on it, I consider that a major success in terms of at least getting into the culture and sort of getting it going. So that's my real address. And that's the website.
Say it out loud.
Oh my God, we're going to podcast my address. Okay. nn@mit.edu. And laptop.org is pretty big. It's got, lots of stuff. It's a little bit difficult to navigate, but please, you can go there if you to find the stuff, to spread the word about Give One, Get One. And we're actually shooting 5 commercials. Last year we got about $8 million worth of TV time on programs I'd never heard of, and very often on Fox, which isn't a channel I would normally look at. But it was, it was, for what it was worth, it was a lot of media support. And last time I asked, we should have about 30,000 billboards on November 17th, and I suspect a lot of magazines will have full-page ads. We never know exactly, because one of the ways you get a full-page ad, especially in this economic climate, is just before it goes to press, if there's some people who've dropped out, you get a full page. And so we don't know in advance whether we've got a full page in Fortune magazine or something until that issue is being printed. And so I can't rattle off the names, but I know that it'll be in Time magazine and forget what it's called. There's one that went to press recently, Women's Day, or I forget all the magazines. So it's a big campaign, but it really could use your help. Okay, so thank you, and let's do the rest with questions. Yes?
Either the oil-rich Arab countries or the Gates Foundation, are they major contributors? They're the ones with a lot of money, and they certainly can resonate with the concept.
Well, the Gates Foundation, since we advocate open source, has had a problem with it. Now that Bill is out of Microsoft, it may be easier. What we did do is we made it possible, actually thanks to Bill, that we can dual boot the machine. I don't happen to have a Windows machine with me, but we have a dual boot machine where at the keyboard you can boot either Windows or Linux. And I caught a lot of grief from the open source community for doing that. I mean, a lot. But I think, like the Apple laptop, that once Apple had the dual boot machine, that allowed the CIOs in many corporations to buy Apples, which they couldn't do before. And now the CIO buys it because it can run Windows, even if the person they buy it for doesn't use Windows. And so I think it's the same applies. We get ministers of education who tell us that it has to run Windows. And so rather than argue, I say, well, it can. Okay? And so we just reach more children that way. So we haven't. The Arab countries, I've spent a lot of time in Dubai and a lot of time with the various people, and haven't spent time in Saudi Arabia, but in the little countries, you know, the UAE countries. It's been a challenge, and we have Dubai coming in again next week. We have people there. We're doing a fair amount in Lebanon, Iraq, and Palestine, and so we will probably have in January a major regional meeting in Amman, Jordan, for the laptop program, and we're constantly looking. Yes?
What is the resistance from the people in Dubai? What are their concerns?
There really isn't a concern that, you know, some concern like the kids might have access to pornography or, you know, some, let me call it substantive concern. It's more about their willingness to take risks. They're very good at buying stock in Citicorp. They're less good at startup companies. They're not the same kind of risk takers. So they're more prone to go with an Intel. Who's this OLPC? It's some professors, yes, Uruguay's. They're not convinced yet. And so we don't drag people to the altar. We go back. We're sufficiently humble that we'll keep going back. But it's not. You know, I was with Sheikh Mohammed recently, and he just wasn't interested. I couldn't get him excited.
Can you get one of them to have complete penetration? One of the UAE areas, complete penetration.
Well, they just asked us that.
Very competitive.
Yeah, that if we would be willing to do it in Dubai itself, and I said, it doesn't make sense to just do it in Dubai. And they said, we want to test it in Dubai and do Yemen. And I said, well, do Yemen, and when that works, test it in Dubai. In other words, do it the other way around.
If they could have I've been there. If they're, they do have some censoring of their internet. Maybe they want to make certain that they can do that.
Well, we can do that better than anybody because in terms of security, we can actually remotely disable the machine. So it's, if they're interested in that, this is their machine. But that hasn't been the issue, really. Now, maybe I just have to spend more time there, but we haven't had success yet, but not for lack of trying. Abu Dhabi was the place where we spent most of the time, and there's competitiveness and there's amongst the sheiks, and the sheiks not only compete with each other, but there's a pecking order, and the, you know,
Abu Dhabi is more oil.
a mid-tier chief from Abu Dhabi can't do more than an upper-tier chief from Dubai, and there's it's complicated. Yes, sir.
Yeah, hi. Just curious about when you were thinking about your outcomes, sort of the design process. Obviously, a laptop is an incredibly flexible creature and can be used for a lot of different purposes in the hands of different teachers and different cultures. I also, at the same time, I'm thinking about sort of Maslow's pyramid, where a population in a rural area would care about sort of health, water being clean, security, etc. I mean, had you thought about maybe more vertically focusing it on some of those needs, or was it really your objective to put your hand in the hands of a teacher, just an incredibly flexible tool that could be used however someone would want to use it?
It was the latter, but I'd say put it in the hands of a kid and use it. But all the other things we get, and our response is never as good as it should be. But people come to us and say, we'd like to use it for health purposes, for primary health care. We'd like to use it for entrepreneurship and microfinance. All of these are environmental monitoring. I mean, I can go down the list, and we get those like every day. And so you send a group a laptop or two, and you say, well, please do whatever you want. But we can't, as an organization, start a medical program or an environmental program and so on. But when we send them to villages, for example, if WHO is there, we'll send extra ones for WHO to have a few. So we will send extra machines to places just so all the other UN and NGO-type organizations who are in the village have them as well. But that's about the best we do. We don't run a program inside. Yes, sir.
I can tell you from being in the mobile industry that every country that you're successful in right now also happen to be the fastest growing mobile internet access countries in the world. From Mongolia Telecom to Uruguay. These countries are, the reason being because they never had the landline infrastructure that we have in the U.S. Mm-hmm. So when the carriers decided, okay, like Vodafone, let's put up towers, the penetration is almost like 100% in these countries in terms of how you can access the internet through your phone. Now, just in terms of pure like communication, in a short period of time, do you think it'll make just as much sense to have these kids learn through audio commands on a phone instead of physically typing? Do you think that'll...
I get that question a lot, and just in the spirit of full disclosure, I'm a director of Motorola, and I've been on the board of directors of Motorola for 13 years. So I follow the industry, and you're absolutely correct. The growth is in the emerging markets. And what that growth allows us to do is to piggyback on their towers. The real key is the connectivity, not the handset. And the reason we don't focus on the handset is that the form factor, the physical size of the handset, doesn't allow for what I will call a reading experience. Okay?
Converts to audio, like right now, they have text to speech and then speech to text.
But again, audio, you can't browse audio. You can't. There are a lot of things about reading and seeing pictures and engaging your peripheral vision, and books have a certain size for a reason, and novels tend to be smaller than atlases, and train tables can be really pretty small, and so on. And there is a theme size and screen size relationship. And so that is one. And then the other is, while the QWERTY keyboard doesn't make much sense, typing with all fingers sort of does. And while most of us in this room have learned to type with our thumbs, that's not really, so the size of that laptop is driven by hand size, and as you may have noticed, it's small hands, and sort of the screen size. And you don't want it too big is also, So we stick to the form factor of a laptop, but boy, we use those towers, and we will use those towers. And oh, yes, we do. We usually get the phone company to give us the right to sit on the tower with our own antennas, and then we use their backhaul. And in the backhaul, we use it on a standby basis so that you're paying very, very little. So you sit there, when there's space available, you send your bits. But you don't use the cellular phone signal, or 3G or otherwise, into the classroom because just the pricing model is just off the charts. You know, they think each kid will have a SIM card. Well, no, that's not the way.
And I guess you can't develop an application on a mobile phone. Not that these kids are writing applications.
They are,
They
actually.
may very well be.
They
right?
may well.
So I guess you can't write HTML or you can't write a markup language on a cell phone.
Yes.
What have you learned about how kids learn?
Since the learning piece has been going on for a long time at the Media Lab, there are two kinds of learning. One is the effect of what we're doing, and there are people who are measuring that and actually, have come up with all sorts of statistics about how reading comprehension improves and just critical thinking improves. And I'm not an expert at measuring those things, but people are doing that, and that's one kind of thing to learn. The other is, I have to tell you that I am just constantly impressed by how quickly the kids just take this and run. They just, I'm always told you just can't drop a laptop in the hands of a kid and walk away. Well, you know what? You sort of can. I mean, there's an awful lot. They open it up and they start doing that. That's not the way to do it. But I am constantly surprised at how quickly they pick.
Is the principal uses an electronic book?
It depends on the country. In Peru, it is more of an electronic book than Uruguay. Uruguay, it's a browser primarily. And in Ethiopia, they use it mostly to write computer programs in a language called Squeak. So it's really a little idiosyncratic. It depends on what the teachers are focused on and the connectivity. In Uruguay, the connectivity is very good because the government owns the phone company and they just decreed it. In Peru, it's much spottier and even more spotty in Ethiopia. Yes, Mika.
I have a different type of question. You've been recognized sort of as the leader and the personality, if I may use that word, behind this effort. How does that, as sort of an entrepreneur, as you progress with this, been something that you maybe shaped or has impacted the development of what you're doing? So, again, you're sort of recognized as the leader with this. What is that? How has that impacted this effort that you're
Well, I'm not sure I'm the right person to answer that. I can give you one answer, and that is that when I decided to take a leave of absence from the Media Lab, I had spent so many years dealing with industry and wrote a book that was a bestseller, and sort of part of the reason to do that was to do OLPC was say, well, listen, you've got this kind of ability to convene people or to get in to see people, why not use it? And it has helped. I'm embarrassed, in fact, when my name is so strongly associated with it, but on the other hand, it has allowed us to get into places where we wouldn't normally get, and that's pretty good, and that has helped a great deal. And it also helped not just because of me, but because of MIT. Because in the beginning, we made statements that were so preposterous that, if I were a professor at, Oklahoma State, no offense to Oklahoma, but, it may not have, but MIT helped a great deal. And MIT was extraordinarily supportive of this, and that helped a great deal. Yes?
So on that note, first of all, just thank you for your unstoppable energy and willingness to get on airplanes that's gone into this. And on a mundane note, could you talk about the evolution of the security capabilities that you talked about from your original thinking to where it is now and where you'd like it to go?
The security concerns are twofold. One is that these machines can be easily stolen and put into the, into the gray market or whatever, black market, and sort of suddenly appear on the streets of Lagos for sale. And so we got a lot of people who were asking us in the beginning, and this really did start in Nigeria, where the Nigerian government said, you've got to make these unstealable. And so we put in some pretty interesting technology that allows you to turn the laptop into a brick remotely. And it doesn't get enabled unless you remotely enable it with a key. Now that assumes a degree of connectivity or the physical keys going out to the countryside, but the decision was made to do that. Now you can get them both secure and insecure. I mean, both are available, but the secure ones really are pretty good about that. But the second security issue is the one you would worry about with kids, because they are, after all, 6 to 12 years old, and that is about what sites and so on, and the privacy of the child, and simple things like the camera. And the camera is hardwired to have an LED, and when that camera's on, that LED is lit. It's really very difficult. I don't want to say impossible, but it's really very difficult to disable that light. So, and that was just there so that if somebody can remotely turn on the camera, at least you know it's been turned on because the little light comes on. So those kinds of security were very high on the agenda. Now, it's also created, some problems, and it's hard to execute, but I believe most of the machines out there, over 50%, have the security enabled. Yes?
I really liked your program of when you buy a laptop and then you effectively get one to donate. I would have expected that. I think you said you sold 185,000.
Yes.
I would have expected that you would have sold millions, and not only because of the social benefit, but also because of the price point. Was that what your expectation was, or did it come in a little lower?
Well, my expectations are always higher than what we do. I mean, I'd hoped for $1 million when we did 185,000. But we didn't even exist. We didn't even have a laptop that had come off the assembly line. The first so-called mass-produced laptop was built 3 weeks after we started the Give One, Get One program last year. So people were really buying a pig in a poke. I mean, it was really, you were investing in the idea and the faith and that we'd ultimately come through. Now it's different. Now, we could only run it 6 weeks last year. In fact, we scheduled it for 2 weeks or 2.5 weeks and then extended it. But we extended it at some risk because the IRS, if we ran it continuously, they would have said you lose your tax status because we're a nonprofit. And there's all sorts of complexities and so on, and we may be able to work around. But we're doing it again now, and we'll do it again for 6 weeks. But I hope it'll be bigger than last year's, and part of it is just to get the word out, get people to do it. So yes, I hope it'll be $1 million, but the truth is that in the Amazon warehouse there'll be 150,000 waiting to go out, so that would, in just Give One, Get One, that's 300 and some odd thousand laptops, because not everybody gives both of them. So we have inventory to do something that could be close to 500,000, and in very short notice the others could be built. So the fact what we've done is scheduled the factory that if on November 22nd we see this huge thing, we can produce more and get them to Amazon in time to meet the demand. In other words, that'd be a great problem. And the worst thing that would happen is some people, then they'd be notified when they click that you just won't get it in time for Christmas. Yes.
Curious to hear your thoughts about the social and political impact of the realization of this vision. And I would imagine that there's probably a limited amount that you can tell us about those conversations that you've had with some world leaders about that topic. But maybe you can share some of your thinking or some of the thoughts that you've had about the risks and opportunities on a social and political level.
Well, I have no problem talking about, these conversations. It's a little early to have deep ones where we can really, say, look, this is what's happened. It's anecdotal, and there's so much anecdotal evidence that it does several things. One is it changes the role of the child in just growing up in society. Children are the objects of, they are told what to do, what to learn, so on and so forth. And they have very little, especially in the developing world, and especially 6 to 12 years old, just really have no voice. Suddenly, these 6 to 12-year-olds are the agents of change. We have more, I can't tell you the pileup of just stories and that come in every day, about children bringing them home and their parents. We have parents who write us and said that we wait for our child to go to sleep at night. And as soon as the child's asleep, we take the laptop and we use it, and at least whatever battery's left. And the child teaches their parents. The child's self-esteem changes. So there's a whole child side of the equation. Then there's the teacher side. We get so many teachers who tell us, and again, they tell their ministries of education, they've never enjoyed teaching so much. And that's really important because we get ministers of education who worry about the union. And in Mexico, to pick a country, the union is more powerful than the minister. The head of the union is more powerful than the minister. Minister will even say that. And that's really important. If you can then assure a head of state or a minister that in the social, sort of as this evolves, the teachers are going to be, and you can say with confidence, the teachers are going to love this. The teachers are going to just really, and they do. And so that's another angle. Then the long term, this is a few years from now, I think the economic impact will be pretty obvious. And in the case, that village in Cambodia, every child in that picture is still in school today, 8 years later. And that's pretty good, too. I mean...
Two more questions?
Yes, go ahead.
It seems like in some specifically rural and urban environments in the United States, there are communities that could benefit from the laptops. I'm amazed at some of the strides you've made overseas. Have you been approached by any communities in the U.S. or vice versa?
I want to say daily. And it's been for us a dilemma. And obviously they're poor children in rich countries. And obviously for patriotic reasons and for all sorts of reasons, we should be doing something here. In the United States, as a nation, we spend $10,000 per child per year on primary education. And so if a laptop costs $300 or $400 or $200 or $100, it doesn't make, it's in the scheme of things, especially when you amortize it over 5 years, it's not that important. And we've designed it for no power. We've designed it for, things. So it's not our context, to be honest with you. On the other hand, when we started Give One, Get One last year, Birmingham, Alabama ordered 14,000, one for each kid in Birmingham. But we're not going to say don't do it. The mayor of Birmingham came up to get them, and so of course, do it. On Friday, I'm back in New York. There are two schools in New York that are saturated at the moment. I visited one school. Actually, I have to tell you a story. I'm always touched by these stories. When I visited the school, I met the students that are the 6th graders who are the tech assistants for the 1st and 2nd graders. It's like the tech team, and there are 6 or 8 of them. And one of the kids was, I'd never heard this expression before, selectively mute. and had been at school for 6 years and had never spoken. So I'm not sure how he said to the principal he wanted to be. I guess you write it. And the principal said to this kid, you can be on the team, but you've got to speak. So go home this weekend and you decide. And he came in Monday speaking. Okay. And I met him, and he wouldn't shut up. He wouldn't shut up. But, and so you get these, and you get kind of goosebumps on your goosebumps, and I find it, he's very, very sort of interesting. And yes, we should do something in the United States, and, there are 1.2 million students just in New York City, but it's a dilemma. We haven't focused on it. We may spin out a whole organization that just does that, and that's what's cooking in our minds at the moment. If anybody's from the press, don't announce it, because we're not. It's what we're thinking about, and I think it'll happen in January or February. We just have to get through Give One, Get One, and so that's what I'm focusing on. I'd love to take all your questions, but you're
One last one.
one last one.
You're talking about tech assistance, and it was a question that I was really going to ask. There has been a lot of talk about, well, if there's going to be a maintenance issue, the kids are going to do it. The kids are great, kids are innovative. Kids in America, here you have the 17-year-old kid who can start a company and everything else. At the same time, outside of certain Western cultures, there's no tradition of computers or anything else. Culturally, it's foreign. Have you found that the kids, and I know it's rugged and everything else, but maintenance, been out for a short amount of time, is that something that you think that you can rely on? The kids will be able to help maintain, help fix, and make sure there's more than a lifetime of a short span?
We first tested it, the idea of getting the kids to do not all the maintenance, but a 14-year-old in Nigeria has at least can do about 95% of the maintenance. And we ran laptop hospitals. The kids, we actually ask kids to take apart their laptop, even if it's working, and put it back together again. And what I've wanted to put on how laptops typically say, if you open this laptop, warranty is no longer valid. I've wanted to print on the back, warranty only valid after you open this laptop, and sort of do the inverse. And we get kids that take them apart and put them back together again, and we encourage that. We've also designed it to be relatively maintainable. For example, the display, if the light goes out in your display, you've got to buy a new display. And the manufacturers kind of set it up that way because your display is 50% of the cost of your laptop. Ours, if the light goes out, you open up the side and you pull out a little LED bar and you push a new one, which costs less than $1, back into the display, and it lights up again. So it's like changing a light bulb. Okay, and the whole display is still. What goes on displays is the light usually. It's not the LCD or the TFT or anything like that. So we've tried to also make it maintainable and a little bit more like a 1960 Volkswagen. When you opened it up, even if you were an auto mechanic, the things are kind of there. You can figure it out. You open up a 2008 car, good luck. You can't. It's nothing recognizable. It's all done electronically, and it's all sort of sealed and very difficult to repair for us normal people.
With no ecosystem in place, though, have you found to date? Have you seen and done
but you said, as you said earlier, there are not enough in the field, and not enough time has come back for me to give you statistics. But we do set up in each country repair centers that are run by people in white jackets in a relatively clean environment that repair the hard things, and then we ship to each village 2% extra laptops. And the idea behind that is that 1% of your laptops statistically are dead on arrival for whatever reason. So, and we do better than 1%. We're at about 0.5%. But let's pretend you have 1% dead on arrival. You have your extras, and the 1% that's dead becomes spare parts. And then you have an extra percent that is used in case a machine has to go back to Lagos by truck or whatever. Then the kid is out a lot. You have that extra. So we try to give extras both for spare parts and then an inventory of spare parts. And so far, it's worked, and it's really important because in the like in Peru, these are really in remote schools, and there are about 30 or 40 or at most 50 laptops in one place, and then it's 10 miles away to the next group, and you're not going to have a maintenance and repair organization, even if you're IBM or whoever. You're just not going to have it in those villages.
Well, thank you very much, Nick.
Okay.
It's a big round of applause.